I used to believe there was something fundamentally wrong with me. Maybe if I talked less, smiled more, or tried harder, my dad would finally notice me. But no matter what I did, he never looked at me the way he looked at my brothers, never with pride, never with warmth, just a quiet, suffocating indifference. My name is Mia, and I grew up as the invisible one in my own family. My father, Michael, wasn't the yelling type. He never had to raise his voice. His silence said everything I remember when I got straight A's in middle school. He barely blinked. But when my younger brother Kyle passed a single class he'd been failing, Dad clapped him on the back, pride radiating from him. That's my boy. The first time I truly felt the sting of his indifference. I was 11. It was Father's Day, and I had poured hours into making a card for him. Glitter stickers, a heartfelt poem I wrote myself. I handed it to him after dinner, my little heart brimming with hope. He glanced at it, muttered a quick, "Thanks," and turned back to his football game. 5 minutes later, my older brother Ethan wandered in and tossed him a store-bought mug that said "Number 1, Dad." My father lit up like he'd just been handed a championship trophy. I remember standing there, still clutching my card, watching as my brothers basked in his attention. It hit me then. I would never be enough. Ethan was the star athlete, breaking school records and getting write-ups in the local paper. Kyle, the youngest, was the charmer, always surrounded by friends and effortlessly likable. And me, I was the quiet one, the girl who spent too much time alone with her sketchbooks and dreams. I had ambition, sure, but in our house, quiet effort didn't shine like loud victories. My mother, Sarah, used to try to balance things out. She'd hug me tight and whisper, "You're special too, sweetheart," but even she couldn't change the hierarchy in our house. If Ethan wanted the last slice of pizza, he got it. If Kyle needed money for a weekend trip, Dad handed it over, no questions asked. I once asked for a new sketchbook, and Dad's response cut deeper than I'd expected. "What's the point? You'll quit halfway like everything else?" That one sentence stayed with me, echoing in my mind every time I felt my confidence slip. At family dinners, Dad would grill my brothers about their plans and goals, always leaning in to hear about Ethan's latest match or Kyle's newest adventure. If I tried to speak, he'd offer a distracted nod or a forced smile before turning back to his sons. It became a silent, crushing routine. Eventually, I learned to stay quiet, to not interrupt their spotlight. But inside, something sharper than sadness started to grow. A burning anger, a determination I couldn't yet name. I pushed myself harder, not to win his approval anymore, but to prove my worth to myself. I stopped trying to win his love and instead focused on building a life he couldn't ignore. I promised myself that one day he would remember me not as the quiet girl he dismissed, but as the woman who shattered his expectations. As the years went by, the cracks in our family's perfect facade deepened. If you walked into our house on Christmas morning or during a summer barbecue, you'd see my brothers laughing with Dad over beers, throwing footballs in the backyard, or huddling over a laptop to discuss Ethan's latest business idea. And me. I was always on the sidelines, the one handing out plates, cleaning up after their messes, quietly fading into the background. Then one night it all changed. I had built something, a startup that was small but full of promise. I had poured my soul into it, sacrificing sleep, weekends, and any semblance of a social life. It was my shot at proving I wasn't just the quiet one. The Forgotten Daughter, the launch event, was held in a sleek, modern conference room downtown. Investors, local press, and industry leaders poured in, their eyes full of curiosity and anticipation. I took the stage, heart pounding, and spoke about my vision, my struggles, and the potential of my platform. For the first time, I felt truly seen, my words filling the room with a quiet, undeniable power. After the presentation, handshakes and congratulations flowed. A few seasoned investors even complimented my work, their praise like fuel to a long-starved fire. I had done it. I had finally stepped out of the shadows. But as I looked around the bustling room, I realized something. The one person I had subconsciously hoped to impress wasn't there. Michael. My father hadn't even bothered to show up. That was the moment I knew. My life, my success, my worth. It would never be defined by his approval. I would build my empire without him. And one day he would realize exactly what he had overlooked. Not because I needed him to, but because he would have no choice. As the weeks rolled by after that pivotal launch event, I felt a shift within myself. It was like a part of me had finally woken up, the part that had been hiding, cowering in the shadows of my father's expectations. I threw myself deeper into my work, driven not by the hope of approval, but by the hunger to matter, to be seen for who I really was. Of course, my father still didn't notice. Even when my startup started gaining traction, he remained oblivious. It wasn't just that he didn't care. It was as if my success existed in a world entirely separate from his. A world where I wasn't his daughter, just another stranger hustling for recognition. One evening, I visited my parents' house for dinner. The air was thick with the smell of grilled steaks and my brother's laughter echoing from the backyard. I stepped into the kitchen and my mother glanced up from the stove, her eyes lighting up briefly. "Oh, Mia, you're here. I wasn't sure you'd make it," she said, setting down a pot with a clatter. I forced a smile. "Yeah, thought I'd drop by." My father appeared in the doorway, a beer in his hand, his eyes barely flicking in my direction before settling on the TV. I took a deep breath, pushing down the familiar sting of disappointment. As we sat around the table, my father leaned back in his chair, his gaze shifting to Ethan, who was busy scrolling through his phone. "Ethan, how's the new business going? I hear you've got some big investors lined up," he said, his voice dripping with pride. Ethan's face lit up. "Yeah, Dad, it's looking good. We're close to locking down our first major deal." Dad leaned in, eyes bright. "That's my boy. You've got a mind for business just like me." I sipped my water, feeling the familiar sensation of being the invisible third wheel. My mind drifted back to my own company, the long nights, the endless emails, the investor meetings where I had to prove my worth over and over again. Kyle chimed in, cutting through my thoughts. "And guess what? Dad, I got a promotion at work. They finally made me a team lead." My father beamed, lifting his beer in a mock toast. "That's my boy. Knew you had it in you." The words hung in the air, echoing in the silent corners of my mind. I cleared my throat, daring to break the unspoken rule of the dinner table. "I actually signed a major partnership last week. It's a big step for my company," I said, my voice steady but my heart racing. For a moment, my father's eyes flicked toward me. I waited, breath held, hoping for a glimmer of pride, a hint of acknowledgement. Instead, he just nodded absently. "That's nice, Mia," he said, turning back to Ethan. "Anyway, tell me more about this deal. What kind of numbers are we talking about?" And just like that, my small hard-earned victory was swept aside like a forgotten note in a loud symphony. I swallowed the bitterness, the sharp sting of rejection cutting deep. Later that night, as I drove home, my fingers tightened around the steering wheel. The streetlights casting fleeting shadows over my face, I replayed the dinner conversation in my mind, each dismissal, each overlooked moment burning into my memory. I could feel the old anger simmering, the same fire that had driven me to start my company in the first place. For too long, I had let my father's indifference define my worth. I had let his lack of acknowledgement shape my self-image, making me feel small, insignificant, and unseen. But as my car sped down the highway, headlights cutting through the darkness, I made a promise to myself. No more. I would no longer shrink to fit the narrow space my father had left for me. In his world, I would take up space. I would demand attention. I would become undeniable. In that moment, I felt a strange, quiet peace settle over me. It wasn't the explosive, victorious feeling I had imagined. It was calmer, more resolved. I didn't need my father's approval to validate my existence. I didn't need to chase after his praise like a neglected child. I would succeed, not despite his indifference, but because of it. And one day, when he finally noticed it would be too late, a few months after that hollow family dinner, my startup started gaining serious traction. My small team had grown from just me and a part-time developer to a tight-knit crew of passionate, hungry creators. We rented a modest but modern office downtown, its glass walls a sharp contrast to the cramped corner of my bedroom where the company had been born. Late one night, as I sat in that office, the city lights stretching out beyond the windows, I received an email that changed everything. An angel investor I had pitched to months ago. Someone I assumed had long forgotten my scrappy little startup had decided to back my company. It wasn't just a small check either. It was the kind of investment that could turn my fledgling business into a real player. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen, the words blurring as tears welled up in my eyes. It felt surreal. This was it. The breakthrough I had been grinding for, sacrificing weekends for, losing sleep over. For the first time in a long while, I let myself bask in the glow of my own accomplishment. The next morning, I called my mother. I wanted to share the news, to hear her voice filled with pride, to feel like a daughter who had finally made her parents proud. The phone rang twice before she picked up, her voice distracted and muffled. "Hey, Mom, I have some big news," I said, my excitement spilling into my tone. "Oh, Mia, can I call you back later?" Your brother Ethan just closed a deal and your father wants us to go out and celebrate. I paused, my heart sinking. Of course, Ethan had another win, and the world had to stop for his triumph. I swallowed the disappointment, forcing a lightness into my voice. Yeah, sure, no problem. I'll talk to you later. As I hung up, the office suddenly felt too big, too empty. My reflection in the glass wall stared back at me, the tired eyes of a woman who had spent years fighting to be noticed, to be valued. I stood up, crossed the room to the mini fridge, and grabbed a cold can of sparkling water, cracking it open with a sharp hiss. I took a long sip, the carbonation biting at my throat, matching the burn in my chest. It hit me then as I stared out over the city. They would never see me. My success, my hard work, my quiet resilience, it would never be enough to break through the thick wall of favoritism that had always separated me from my brothers in my father's eyes. And that's when I made a decision. I would stop waiting for them to notice. I would stop longing for their approval. I would become so successful, so undeniably influential, that even if they never acknowledged me, the world would. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my work with a new kind of fury. I networked, relentlessly pitched to every investor who would take a meeting, and streamlined my product until it shone like polished steel. My team noticed the shift, their own energy rising to match mine. One Friday afternoon, my head of marketing, Lisa, poked her head into my office, a sly grin on her face. "Mia, you've got to see this," she said, sliding her phone across my desk. I glanced down at the screen. It was a LinkedIn post. My father had shared a long, glowing message about Ethan's latest business deal, complete with photos of them shaking hands in some glossy office lobby. Proud of my son Ethan for his relentless drive and vision, a true entrepreneur. I felt the familiar stab of jealousy, the old wound reopening. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of the usual sting, I felt a quiet, simmering anger, a steady, determined heat that spread through my veins. I picked up my own phone, opened my company's social media account, and crafted a post of my own. It wasn't flashy, just a straightforward announcement about our recent funding round, but it felt like a declaration of independence. Proud to announce our first major round of investment. We're just getting started. I hit post, my fingers trembling slightly as the notification pinged. My small, growing network started reacting almost immediately. Messages of support and congratulations pouring in. I sat back, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. I didn't need my father's recognition. I had built this. I had made this happen. And one day they would see it, even if they had to look up from the shadows of their own spotlight. That night, as I locked up the office and stepped into the cool night air, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Freedom. The kind of freedom that comes from finally breaking the chains of someone else's expectations, from stepping out of a shadow you never deserved to stand in. As I walked to my car, the city lights flickering around me, like a million tiny sparks, I whispered to myself a quiet, defiant promise. They'll see me, one way or another. They'll see me. And with that, I drove into the night, my future finally my own to shape. The months that followed were a blur of late nights, endless meetings, and caffeine-fueled sprints to hit our quarterly goals. My company was no longer just a fledgling startup. It was becoming a force. We had secured our second round of funding, expanded our team, and signed our first major corporate client. Every small victory felt like a quiet rebellion against my father's years of indifference. But as my professional life soared, the chasm between me and my family only widened. I stopped attending Sunday dinners, tired of watching my brothers bask in my father's praise while my accomplishments went unnoticed. I answered fewer calls from my mother, each conversation a reminder of the distance growing between us. It hurt, but it also felt necessary, like pulling off a bandage to let a wound finally breathe. One evening, I was sitting in my sleek, glass-walled office, the city lights shimmering like 1,000 tiny promises, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my brother, Ethan. Ethan. "Hey, Mia. Dad's turning 60 next month. We're planning a surprise party. Can you make it?" I stared at the message, my jaw clenching. Of course, another chance for the family to gather and shower my father with praise. Another evening of watching from the sidelines while my brothers took center stage. I almost typed back a quick, polite excuse, but something stopped me. I took a deep breath, my fingers hovering over the screen. "Mia, yeah, I'll be there." As soon as I hit send, a strange calm washed over me. For the first time, I didn't feel like a child begging for a sliver of his approval. I felt like a storm gathering, quiet but powerful, building in strength. The weeks flew by, each day pulling me closer to the party. I threw myself into work, my focus sharper than ever. We launched a new feature one that received rave reviews from industry insiders. My small team celebrated with cheap champagne and late-night pizza, their laughter filling the office as the city sparkled outside our windows. But my mind was elsewhere, already crafting the moment I would finally step out of the shadows. Finally, the night of my father's party arrived. I chose my outfit carefully, a sleek, tailored black dress that hugged my frame and sharp stilettos that clicked with purpose on the marble floors of the upscale restaurant they had rented for the occasion. I parked my new electric sports car, a quiet, powerful machine that felt like an extension of my newfound confidence, and strode through the doors, my heart steady. Inside, the restaurant was buzzing. Waiters in crisp uniforms weaved through clusters of laughing guests, glasses clinking and voices echoing off the high ceilings. I spotted my father near the bar, surrounded by his friends, his face lit with a rare, genuine smile. My brothers Ethan and Kyle flanked him, their voices rising above the crowd as they recounted stories of their latest victories. I made my way through the crowd, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. As I approached the small stage they had set up for speeches, my mother caught my eye, her face lighting up with surprise. She stepped toward me, arms outstretched. "Mia, you made it." "I wasn't sure you'd come," she whispered, pulling me into a quick, tight hug. Her eyes searched my face, a mixture of relief and concern, flickering in their depths. "Of course, Mom. I wouldn't miss it," I said, my voice steady, my smile calm. As the night wore on, my father took to the stage, the crowd quieting as he raised his glass. He began his speech, the usual mix of humble brags and nostalgic tales about raising his two remarkable sons. I watched him closely, my fingers wrapped around the stem of my glass, my heart oddly still. When he finished, the room erupted in applause, the clinking of glasses and shouts of cheers ringing through the air. He stepped down, and for a moment our eyes met. He hesitated, his brow furrowing slightly as if he had just noticed me for the first time that night. I took a deep breath, set my glass down, and stepped up to the stage. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward me. I felt their curiosity, the whispers rustling through the crowd like a slow gathering wind. I tapped the microphone, the sound echoing sharply through the room. My father, still standing nearby, crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Hi, everyone." I began, my voice steady, my gaze sweeping the room. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mia, Michael's daughter." A few polite smiles flickered around the room, my brothers exchanging puzzled glances. I forced a smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach your eyes. I just wanted to say a few words. Growing up, my father always taught me the importance of hard work, perseverance, and strength. I continued, my voice carrying over the crowd. He taught me that success is earned, not given. That respect isn't just something you're born into, but something you fight for. I paused, letting the words sink in, my eyes locking onto my father's. I saw it then, the slight twitch in his jaw, the tightening of his grip on his glass. "And I want to thank him for that," I added, my voice gaining strength, each word sharper than the last. "Because those lessons have carried me further than he'll ever know." I reached into my purse, my fingers finding the small black envelope I had prepared. I held it up, the heavy embossed paper catching the soft glow of the chandelier above. "This is for you, Dad. A small token of appreciation for everything you've taught me." I stepped down from the stage, my heels clicking sharply against the polished wood as I crossed the room, the envelope extended in my outstretched hand. My father took it, his eyes flicking from the envelope to my face, a shadow of confusion crossing his features. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. "Read it carefully," I said, pulling back to meet his startled gaze. "It's the ownership transfer for the company that just acquired your firm." I straightened, stepping back as his face slowly drained of color, his fingers tightening around the envelope. The room around us continued to hum with laughter and clinking glasses, oblivious to the storm I had just unleashed. I smiled, a slow, satisfied curl of my lips, and turned on my heel, my steps echoing behind me as I left the restaurant, my heart pounding, my mind clear. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the echoes of clinking glasses and soft jazz from the restaurant behind me faded into the background. My pulse was a steady, defiant drumbeat in my ears. I took a deep breath, the crisp air filling my lungs, sharpening my focus. I had just set the first piece of my plan in motion, and there was no turning back now. The next morning, I awoke to a string of missed calls and frantic text messages from my mother and brothers. I ignored them. Letting the phone vibrate itself into exhaustion on my bedside table, I knew what they wanted. Explanations, justifications, a chance to downplay my move as some overblown gesture. But I wasn't interested in justifying myself anymore. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. This time with a name I hadn't expected: my father. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering over the screen before I let the call go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear his voice, to let his disappointment or anger crack the calm armor I had carefully constructed around myself. Instead, I threw myself into my work. My team had no idea what had transpired the night before, but they could feel the shift in my energy, the sharper focus in my tone, the fire in my eyes. I led our morning meeting with a new intensity, outlining our next goals, pushing for tighter deadlines, and encouraging them to think bigger, aim higher. A few hours later, as I sat alone in my office, my assistant Lisa poked her head in, her eyes wide with barely contained excitement. "Mia, you might want to see this," she said, sliding her phone onto my desk. I glanced down at the screen, my heart skipping a beat. It was a news alert from one of the industry's top financial blogs. Family-owned tech firm acquired in surprise takeover industry, shaken by bold move from rising startup. The article detailed the sudden acquisition, highlighting my company's rapid growth and sharp strategy, even quoting a few anonymous insiders who praised my bold leadership. But the best part? The piece ended with a brief but pointed mention of my father's firm, noting the shocking reversal of roles. I felt a slow, burning satisfaction spread through my chest. I had made my move, and now the world was watching. I handed the phone back to Lisa, who gave me a conspiratorial grin before slipping back into the hallway. That evening, as I locked up the office and stepped into the cool evening air, my phone finally pinged with a voicemail notification. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb trembling slightly as I opened the message. It was my father. His voice, usually so steady and controlled, had a raw, almost desperate edge to it. "Mia." He began, the sound crackling slightly over the line. I don't know what this is, what you're trying to prove. But if this is about last night, if this is about some misguided need for attention, we need to talk. Call me back. We need to fix this before it gets out of hand. I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. He still didn't get it. He still saw this as some childish act of rebellion, a desperate cry for his approval. He didn't understand that this was never about him, not anymore. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and walked to my car, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement, each step a quiet, defiant drumbeat. That weekend, I ignored another dozen calls from my father. My brothers reached out too, their messages swinging wildly from concern to condescending, as if they couldn't decide whether to scold me for my audacity or beg for an explanation. By Monday, I knew it was time for the next step. I called my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had guided me through the acquisition with a steady hand and a ruthless eye for detail. "Is everything in place for the board meeting next week?" I asked, leaning back in my chair, my gaze drifting to the city skyline outside my window. "Yes," she replied, her voice crisp and professional. "We have the majority vote. Your father will be forced to acknowledge the change in ownership. He can't block it." I felt a cold, satisfying weight settle in my chest. It was all coming together. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one on the sidelines waiting for a scrap of recognition. I was at the center of the storm, the one holding the strings. The following week, I walked into the boardroom of my father's company for the first time in years. The walls were lined with dark wood, the air thick with the scent of polished leather and old money. My father was already seated at the head of the table, his jaw set, his eyes narrowing as I entered. I took a seat directly across from him, my lawyer settling in beside me. My father's gaze flicked between us, the tension in his shoulders visible even through his tailored suit. "Let's get this over with," he said, his voice a low, angry rumble. I smiled, leaning back in my chair, my fingers tapping a slow, deliberate rhythm against the cool mahogany surface. The meeting began, the usual formalities quickly giving way to the main event. My lawyer presented the documents, her voice calm and precise as she outlined the transfer of power, the new leadership structure, and the unavoidable reality of my father's diminished role. As she spoke, I watched my father's face, the slow realization dawning in his eyes as the true depth of my plan became clear. His jaw tightened, his fists clenching on the table as each carefully worded clause landed like a hammer blow. When my lawyer finally finished, the room fell into a stunned silence. My father stared at me, his eyes burning with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You did this?" he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "You set this up, you planned this." I met his gaze, my own expression calm, my voice steady. Yes, Dad, I replied, leaning forward, my elbows resting on the polished wood. I did. And I'm not sorry. I stood pushing my chair back with a slow, deliberate motion. I straightened my jacket, my eyes never leaving his. I've spent my entire life trying to earn your respect to prove my worth. I continued, my voice gaining strength. But I'm done chasing your approval. I don't need it anymore. I've built something on my own without your help, without your praise, without your love. And now you'll finally have to see me. Whether you like it or not. I turned my heels, clicking sharply against the marble floor as I walked out of the boardroom. My father's stunned silence following me into the hallway. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. The days following that boardroom showdown were a whirlwind. My father's calls became more frantic, shifting from stern commands to thinly veiled pleas. His tone tinged with a desperation I had never heard before. I ignored them all. My focus locked on the path ahead. My steps no longer shadowed by his indifference. My company's growth accelerated. With my father's firm now under my control, I had access to resources, networks, and opportunities I had only dreamed of. I invested in new talent, restructured outdated departments, and pushed the business into new cutting-edge markets. I was no longer the quiet girl in the background cleaning up after others. I was a leader, a force, a woman, carving her own place in the world. But as the dust settled, I realized something had shifted within me. I had spent so long trying to prove myself to a man who would never see my worth that I had forgotten what it felt like to live for myself. For the first time in years, I took a step back, letting myself breathe, letting myself enjoy the view from the peak I had fought so hard to reach. One evening, as I sat alone in my office, the city lights casting long, soft shadows across the glass walls, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. Mom. Mia, please come to dinner this weekend. Your father wants to talk, we all do. It's important. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the reply button. I felt a familiar pang, a small, lingering ache in the corner of my heart. Despite everything, some part of me still wanted to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. After a long pause, I typed a simple response. Mia, I'll think about it. The weekend arrived faster than I expected. I dressed carefully, choosing a sharp navy blue blazer that made me feel both powerful and composed. As I pulled up to my parents' house, memories flickered through my mind. Birthday parties where I was an afterthought. Family dinners where my voice had been just background noise. But tonight, I would not be ignored. I stepped inside the familiar scent of my mother's cooking, filling the air, mingling with the low hum of nervous conversation. My brothers were already there, standing awkwardly in the living room, their eyes flicking toward me as I entered. Hey, Mia. Ethan said, his voice uncertain, his usual confidence replaced by a wary, almost cautious tone. I nodded, forcing a tight smile. Hey. My mother appeared from the kitchen, her face lighting up with a mix of relief and anxiety as she wrapped me in a brief, tense hug. Thank you for coming, she whispered, her hands squeezing my shoulders. It means a lot. I stepped back, my gaze shifting to my father, who stood by the fireplace, his shoulders tense, his eyes locked on the floor. He looked older, smaller somehow, the weight of the past few weeks clearly pressing down on him. We sat down for dinner, the clatter of plates and quiet murmur of small talk filling the air as my mother passed dishes around, her hands trembling slightly. My father remained silent, his fork barely touching his food, his eyes distant. Finally, as the meal wound down, he cleared his throat, the sound startling in the otherwise quiet room. Mia, he began, his voice rough, the words seeming to catch in his throat. I owe you an apology. I set down my fork, my heart tightening, my pulse quickening. I met his eyes, the same deep, dark eyes that had always looked right through me, and waited. I didn't see you, he continued, his hands clenching into fists on the table. I didn't see your effort, your hard work, your worth. I took you for granted. I thought I knew my children, but I clearly didn't. He paused, his gaze dropping to his plate, his jaw tightening. You've built something incredible, something I never expected. You've proven yourself in ways I should have seen, but didn't. And for that, I am truly sorry. The room fell into a stunned silence, the only sound the soft clinking of glasses as my mother wiped a tear from her eye, her breath coming in shallow, shaky gasps. My brothers sat frozen, their faces pale, their eyes wide with shock. I felt a tightness in my chest, a strange conflicted pressure that felt like a mix of triumph and grief. I had spent my whole life waiting for these words, for this moment. But now that it was here, it felt hollow. I took a deep breath, my eyes never leaving his. "Thank you, Dad," I said, my voice steady, each word sharp and clear. "But I didn't do this for your approval. I did this for me. I built my company, my life, because I wanted to prove to myself that I was capable, that I could stand on my own. I stopped needing your validation a long time ago." He flinched, his eyes dropping to the table, his jaw clenching again as my words landed like a final cutting blow. I pushed back my chair, the sound sharp and startling in the quiet room. I reached for my jacket, my movements slow and deliberate. "I appreciate the apology," I continued, my gaze sweeping the table, taking in my mother's tear-streaked face, my brother's stunned expressions, and my father's bowed head. "But I think it's time I stopped looking back. I have a life to build, and I'm going to do it on my terms." With that, I turned, my heels clicking sharply against the polished wood floor as I walked out of the house, the door closing softly behind me. I stepped into the cool night air, the stars bright and sharp against the dark sky, my heart lighter than it had been in years. I slid into my car, the engine purring to life as I pulled away from the house, my past slowly disappearing in the rearview mirror. For the first time, I felt truly, utterly free. And as the city lights stretched out before me, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. I will never be invisible again. Story 2. I once thought that family was the most important thing, that blood would always be there for you, no matter what life threw at you. My name is Ela, and I discovered all too late that strangers aren't always the source of your greatest grief. It originates from the individuals that kissed your forehead in the past. Good night. I was the trustworthy one. When no one else answered the phone, that person did. My parents lacked the down payment when they discovered their ideal home, a comfortable 2-story home just outside of the city. My parents had retired early because of health concerns, and my dad's credit was in ruins. I jumped in without thinking. For years, I had been saving for my own home by taking shortcuts, forgoing holidays, and even taking up freelancing work after my day job. However, I didn't hesitate. I signed the mortgage with them, placed my name on the documents, and gave them almost every dime I have. I was told I was their angel when I made them cry. We'll never forget this. Lila, my sister Samira, even assured me as she gave me a strong embrace. I trusted her. God, I thought she was real. For a time, everything felt fine. In the house, we created memories. Movie evenings, birthday celebrations with an excess of cake and a shortage of seats, and family barbecues. With them, I felt like I had established a strong foundation, something enduring. We had a tight relationship, or so I believed. Then the text arrived. Late one evening, it appeared in our family group chat. My phone buzzed, just as I was ready to go to bed after folding clothes. I noticed it when I looked down. "To us, you are dead. Our attorney will give you a call. We're always satisfied with your sister. You are not necessary to us, huh?" I read it twice. My heart stopped beating, as if the floor had been pulled out from beneath me. I starved for the ones I bled for. When they had nothing, they stood by. I had been interrupted by a message. No call. Not a warning. Just that I gazed numbly at the screen. I should have sobbed, yelled and phoned them in a fit of wrath, but I refrained from doing so. I just responded as you requested. Instead, I stared at the bright message on my phone screen for a long time. My digits became icy. The cruelty was too much for my mind to process. My heart seemed to sense that something horrible had occurred. However, my mind continued to wonder. Is this real? To us, you are dead? Really? Not even a phrase. Words are only a sharp sword. I wasn't even called by name. My own parents, Samira. My sister was their choice. Once more, it seems that Samira had been sulking behind my back for months, whispering lies in their ears, accusing me of having power over everything, simply because my name was on the home documents. The kid with the wide smile and the greater lies had always been the golden child. She was skilled at twisting events such that the truth bent like a ribbon around her. Not only was the message sentimental, it was also lawful. Our attorney will give you a call. They refused to communicate with me in a humane manner. They intended to treat me as a danger, an issue that needed to be solved. What Samir had informed them was unknown to me. However, it made no difference. They had complete faith in her. Definitely the worst aspect. They didn't even hesitate before speaking. Don't second-guess yourself. No room for justification. A simple cold cut. I sat by myself in my small apartment, which I had kept private so as not to disturb their solitude in the family I assisted. I felt as though I had never known my own life before. I had put all of my energy into them. Every penny, every sacrifice. In my memory burned like wind-blown ashes. I didn't weep, though. Then no, I was aware that I would pass out if I shed even a single tear. They also didn't deserve to witness my breakdown as you requested. I typed my response. I put the phone down after that calmly, silently. My hands ceased to tremble. I got up, inhaled, and made my way to the kitchen. I want to get myself a drink of water and begin to think. Not sob into a pillow. Because I would also want to make this legal if they did. Even though I didn't have much at birth, I worked harder than most people, while other youngsters partied after college. Late into the night, I worked double shifts and freelanced. I just wanted to save enough money to create something enduring for the people I cared about. Even though my family wasn't wealthy, I thought we could all succeed if I provided enough and hung on to each other. My folks were apprehensive when they discovered the house. Even if the seller was making a discount, it was still out of reach. However, I noticed the expression on my mother's face as she stood on the front porch picturing grandchildren playing in the garden. I could see my father was secretly calculating every dollar they didn't have, even if he appeared proud. I offered to help that night. I've been putting money aside. I assured them that I could make the down payment. The mortgage can be registered in my name. It will be our home. My mom broke down in tears. My father gave me a hug he hadn't given me since I was a little child. Like a kid at a birthday celebration, Samira clapped. "You're truly saving us." "Ela," she said. It seemed like love at the time. That wasn't all, though. After leaving her job to pursue her business goals, Samira found herself in financial trouble a year later. She had 3 credit cards maxed up, was being called by debt collectors, and was unsure of what to do. Of course she came to me. She pleaded, "I just need a few thousand to keep the lights on. Don't tell mom and dad, please." So I sent the money to her 5 times, not once or twice. Since she was my sister, I spent what little money I had left on a trip or even a used automobile. I assumed she would eventually get her bearings and perhaps express gratitude. She didn't. Dad had a stroke after that. He was severely affected, and my mother was unable to handle anything by herself so that she wouldn't have to do it alone. I took time off work, drove him to appointments, negotiated with insurance, and even went through harrowing nights in the intensive care unit. "You're our rock," they remarked. "We won't forget this," they said, but it was all done by them. The love, time, and money I sacrificed hours of my life to keep theirs together. I never asked for anything in exchange. Only loyalty, just the facts. Only, so they might support me in the event that things become difficult. Instead, they chose Samira's falsehoods above my allegiance the instant she felt I was inconvenient. And all the evenings when I believed I was supporting my family, as it happens, I was only constructing a home for people who had no intention of letting me remain as you, like I only stated that. No shouting, no pleading, no lengthy paragraphs in which I try to rectify their misrepresented facts or even to explain myself. Only 4 words after sending the message, I saw the 3 dots briefly show on the screen before vanishing. Nobody answered, not even a phony guilty moment. Most likely they believed they had won, that I would stealthily slip away, defeated and humiliated, bearing the burden of a shattered family once more. Perhaps they imagined me crying in a corner while they repeat their comments until I confess my crimes. However, they were unaware of me. Not at all. They were unaware that I had been grieving for them for a long time before I received that text. I could sense the coldness beneath their grins and the steady trickle of distance. The way Samira took advantage of every circumstance to keep us together. I had prayed, hoped, and worked. However, the funeral was described in that passage. That night I buried the thought of us, like a woman with nothing left to lose. I wore a fresh blouse, pulled my hair back, and entered my lawyer's office the following morning. There's just dignity to recover. I immediately recognized Mr. Roman, a family lawyer I had worked with years before, while I was assisting my parents with the mortgage. "You know, I lost it, everything." I grinned. "It will be. I have certain property paperwork that need to be changed." He blinked. The home, I gave a nod. "Indeed, I would like my name removed." His gaze expanded. "Did you assist in buying it?" That would imply that I am fully aware of its meaning. I wasn't being nice when I gave it to them. I wasn't weak. Therefore, I wasn't leaving. I have the long term in mind. You see, the deed still had a condition about the house. One that said that without my signature on the paperwork, any removal or transfer of ownership needed my complete approval and a renegotiation of debt liability. Their salary and credit would not be sufficient, so they would have to remortgage from scratch. Mr. Harmon thoroughly reviewed the documents. Would you want to alert them? No, I answered firmly. I'll let their attorney call first, let him panic. Grinning, he started to draft the paperwork. I had clarity in that instant. Rather than grief or rage, I wasn't attempting to be the fixer. For once, I wasn't pleading for attention or recognition. I was regaining command. Through strategy, not retaliation. Let them think I was finished. Give them time to reflect. To be silent was to give up. Because the most powerful thing you can do when you've been undervalued all your life is to quietly smile and alter the rules of the game while nobody is around. What they were unaware that I had never fully granted them the authority they believed they had over me, something that none of my family members had bothered to comprehend. Yes, I signed the documents in good faith, put my name on the mortgage, and did what I believed to be right. I never mentioned it to them, though, and they assumed it was something I didn't need to show off. My legal claim to the property had not been signed away. The deed's principal holder was still me. My family had pushed me away so quickly that they thought I would blend in with the background. In actuality, though, I had been considering my options when I assisted them with the house. I was fully aware of what I was doing. Even in my generosity, I had always been wary. I wasn't an idiot. The plan began to take shape when I got to Mr. Raymond's office that morning. In order to formally remove my name from the house deed, he was already drafting the required paperwork. I appreciated that he had always been professional and treated me like a client rather than a gullible young woman who had been taken advantage of, and he didn't inquire as to why I wanted it done so discreetly. While he went through the documents, I leaned back and relived everything in my head. The calls I had placed on their behalf while they were stuck in traffic. I stayed up late on those nights to make sure their health insurance was set up. I had repeatedly donated the money as if it didn't matter. They now sought to remove me from their lives, like I was just some passing inconvenience. But they didn't realize they were dealing with someone who understood the fine print. My name was on the deed, but it wasn't just an ownership claim. It was a position of power. And once my name was removed from the house paperwork, they would lose the legal ability to control the property the way they thought they could without my consent. The house wasn't theirs. Not legally. I could have made a scene. I could have gone to them, told them what I was doing, and made sure they knew how I was playing my cards. However, I didn't. I wanted them to feel the full weight of their mistake. The shock when they realized they couldn't fix this with a simple phone call or lawyer's letter. After I signed the final forms, I handed them back to Mr. Rahman, feeling a strange sense of peace. The paperwork would take a couple of days to process, but once it was done, the house would be legally up for grabs again. They wouldn't be able to refinance, they wouldn't be able to sell it, and I would be the one holding the power. But I wasn't looking for revenge. I was simply taking back what I had given. Quietly, methodically. They would soon learn that what they had taken for granted had cost them more than they could ever have imagined. 2 days later, I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing off the hook. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but something in my gut told me it was about to be important. I picked up, still half asleep, trying to shake the haze of the morning. Hello. The voice on the other line was agitated, breathless. I left. It's Mr. Kareem, your family's lawyer. My stomach sank. My name was on the tip of his tongue, and the terror in his voice was apparent. Eli. We need to discuss immediately. This is a severe problem. I sat up in bed, my heart thumping. What's going on? There was a delay before he spoke again. The property documentation. You lawfully deleted your name from the deed. I felt the corner of my lips curve into a faint grin. Indeed I did. He sputtered, shocked. However, Eli, that's not something you can do. The home was purchased with your assistance. Your name is not on the deed yet. Your family is depending on that property. They are unable to refinance. They are unable to sell it. Without your consent, they are unable to even pay their mortgage. I spoke calmly while leaning back against the cushions. I get it. That is the reason I did it. Panic sounded in his voice. Isla, this isn't simply a small legal error. Since you are not included on the deed, you have totally eliminated their claim to that property. In a technical sense, they no longer own it. The house is not legally theirs. I could hear him typing on his keyboard, perhaps going over the court filings as if they were some sudden catastrophe. You have placed your family in a very challenging situation, he said in a gentler, almost begging tone. They risk losing everything if this isn't resolved right now. My hands were solid, not trembling, as they could have from fear or shame. Rather, I experienced a sense of serenity and detachment that I had been longing for ever since that text message appeared in my inbox. I said, "I'm sure they'll figure it out. They'll manage." "I'm sure?" His annoyance increased. "Please consider what you're doing, Isla. The future of your entire family is at stake because of this. This type of fallout is beyond their capabilities. We are discussing a complete financial catastrophe. Without you, they can't even enter the house. They are almost homeless as a result of you. For what purpose? You must reverse this." I understood exactly what he was thinking. He was attempting to persuade me to change my mind. Perhaps he assumed I was upset I wasn't hurt, but perhaps he believed I was. This was no longer about pain or fury. For the first time in my life, I was advocating for myself. I wasn't attempting to make things right. I wasn't attempting to keep my composure for them. They would now suffer the repercussions of taking me for granted, since I had contributed enough. I've already decided. My voice was solid as I said, "I'll let you and your customers figure out how to make things right." Before he could utter another word, I hung up. For a time, my fingers lingered over the phone. The decision's burden no longer seemed heavy. It was liberating. On the other end of that phone, there was fear and pandemonium. That was no longer my burden, but theirs. I had just reclaimed what was rightfully mine. And the fact that they had made a mistake was just now starting to sink in. When they arrived at my door, I wasn't shocked. I was aware that it would happen eventually. They had misjudged me. Believing that I would simply roll over and plead with them to take me back, they wrote me off. However, this was not a sign of weakness on my part. It was a flash of insight. I heard the knock in the late afternoon. Even before I answered the door, I knew precisely who it was. Samira was the first to stand. Behind her, her eyes were red, and her face was blotchy from sobbing. My parents stayed looking a mixture of amazement and desperation. Upon seeing me, Samir's voice faltered. "Please, Isla, you must make this right. You must reapply your name to the deed. The house cannot be lost." "Well, we will work it out. I swear we were mistaken. We apologize?" Her speech was hurried, as if her transgression might be washed away with a wave of guilt. I observed her with a distant composure that really astonished me, rather than with rage or sadness. "I apologize," as though I hadn't heard her clearly. I asked quietly, "Are you sorry?" She sniffed and nodded. "Eli, we need you even though I know we've damaged you. You have always supported us. Don't do this, please. You must prevent us from losing everything." My father's voice cracked with intensity as he talked. "Listen to us, Eli. Without you, we have no idea how to resolve this. Your family is us. You cannot simply discard everything. We need your assistance, please." Feeling the impact of what they had sent me, I examined each of them individually, just a few days ago. "To us, you are dead." My voice was almost heard as I spoke, yet the effect of what I said resonated between us. Do you recall what you said? Those precise phrases. "To us, you are dead. Our attorney will give you a call. We're always satisfied with your sister. You are not necessary to us." For a while, it seemed as though time had stopped. As their faces froze in amazement, I could see the remorse and recognition of the seriousness of their acts in their eyes gradually coming to them. But now there was no going back. I wasn't a fallback option for them in case everything went wrong. "I am no longer in need of you," I remarked, keeping the door open just enough to convey my point while taking a little step back to shut it. "You made a decision. When I was your final option, you shut me off, your fallback. You want me to fix it for you after you booted me out?" My father's face was contorted in a frantic cry, and I could see his hands trembling. "Don't do this, Isla. We apologize. You are necessary to us. Please, I'll put things right." "I will." I interrupted him by shaking my head. "No. What you did cannot be undone, nor with tears, nor with an apology. You now have to face the repercussions of your decision. I've finished making all the repairs for you." Samir's face was crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks, but I was unable to find the strength to console her. I couldn't forgive them with a mere apology, since the betrayal had been too profound and deeply embedded. "Farewell." My voice was solid as I said, "I wish you luck in solving it. But this time I won't be the one to save you." I then shut the door behind me. "It's out of finality, not rage." There was no turning back, nor for themselves nor for me. They had gone too far and were unable to turn back. I had no intention of destroying them. I didn't want to see them fall apart because of what they had done. I wasn't like that. I had no desire for vengeance. No. It was far more rewarding what I accomplished. Much more significant in the long term. I didn't want to cause rifts. I just wanted to leave a family that had already given up on me. I sold the house as my first action. The money wasn't the only factor. It was about taking charge of my life, about taking away what they so heedlessly believed they were entitled to. After all, the house was still legally mine, and I was cool and collected while others floundered in their terror. My decision was made without hesitation or second thoughts. I promptly sold it for a sum that would still leave my family in a difficult financial situation, but it was more than fair. The earnings. They weren't for me anyway. Not totally. I gave a sizable amount to a women's shelter where I had previously volunteered on a few occasions. It seemed like the proper course of action. The shelter has assisted several women in escaping violent relationships, so it was a potent way to use the funds for recovery. Look for fresh beginnings. In order to provide other women with the same level of empowerment that I was coming to accept for myself, I wanted to help them. I made prudent investments with the remaining funds which went into my own future and new life. A little stock real estate. It had nothing to do with money. It was about freedom, stability, and the type of future I could never have imagined while I was constantly thinking about other people. My family, on the other hand, had to cope with the consequences. It was an agonizing experience. However, they had already prepared their bed and now had to lie on it. In the days that followed, I avoided them at all costs. They called their lawyers letters of apology filled with threats and frantic entreaties. They pleaded with me to take back their house by reversing the transaction. They attempted to control me by playing on my guilt and perceived feeling of accountability. I didn't respond, though I choose to disregard it all. I wouldn't allow them to return to my life. I had learned the hard way that I could no longer allow somebody to have that type of control over me. Not because I was cold-hearted. After a few weeks, I became accustomed to my new flat and noticed how serene and liberated I felt. The continual pressure to save everyone else didn't drag me down. I had nothing to do with keeping it together. At last, I was able to breathe for the first time in years. Actually breathe. Then one day I got a message from a bygone period. It wasn't long. A plain text message that said, "We apologize. We were unable to comprehend. Everything is gone. Talk to us, please." My heart felt strangely at ease as I gazed at the TV. The message was not one of pleasure, no triumphant rush. Simply the silent acceptance of a fact that I had previously accepted. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I never heard from my parents again. Like I usually did when things were hard, they had moved on. However, there was no faking this time. The reality could not be avoided. They had attempted to hide behind a lot of remorse and deception. They were the only ones left to deal with the fallout from their treachery after pushing me away. I felt for the first time in my life that I was in the right place. I had no one else to live for. My happiness wasn't being sacrificed for a family that didn't appreciate me. I was no longer bound by their expectations and was living for myself. And I couldn't help but experience a sense of peaceful contentment as I gazed into the future. The family that had previously meant the world to me had been let go. I had left with dignity rather than rage, and I had actually regained that authority. At last, I had made my own decision. Story 3. I apologize, my love. This is a family-only table, pointing me to a fold-out chair beside the garbage can. My mother grinned. Everyone chuckled, but the waiter turned to face me when the $4.600 bill arrived. Not my table, I responded with a smile. Everything changed forever that night. As he brought out the velvet-lined seats for my family one by one, the maitre grinned. Every seat faces a candlelit table with menus edged in gold and crystal glasses. You only went to that type of place once a year? If that. Additionally, it was for my mother's birthday this year. Everyone wore well-tailored suits to impress my brothers. For this evening, I had saved up for weeks to purchase a basic black attire and shoes, as well as my sister's luxury dress. I arrived 5 minutes late and grinned as I looked around for a seat. My mother's lips twisted smugly as her gaze met mine, cold and deliberate. She gestured over her shoulder. She exclaimed, "Oh, sweetheart, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. This is a family-only table." Bewildered, I blinked. She gestured toward an empty fold-out chair. one of those cheap metal things that squeak. It sat clumsily next to a garbage can and a swinging kitchen door adjacent to a service station. I heard my siblings laughing. My aunt seemed to be attempting to conceal a chuckle by covering her lips. My father didn't even raise his head for a while. I stood there with my cheeks flaming and my pulse racing, waiting for someone to tell me it was a joke. No one did. Even though I obviously had a spot at the main table where I belonged. Without saying a word, I nodded, bit my lip and moved to sit on the chilly chair. Behind me, I could see a busboy discarding food crumbs and a discolored wall. I heard loud laughing and drinks clinking. Nobody ever inquired about my well-being or whether I even wanted a menu. I ordered sparkling water, blinked back tears and pretended that the pain in my eyes was only from the scent of trash and bleach. I also smiled at the waiter as he passed. Something changed in me that night. Even though I wasn't aware of it yet, I wasn't humiliated by the chair at that very time. It was only the start. The way your mother looks at you is said to be something you never forget. I never have either because I didn't get a loving glance from my mother. She treated me as though I were an extra burden that she had to deal with. Our house was picture perfect from the outside when I was growing up. A fence with white pickets. Portraits of the family on the mantle. Birthday celebrations that resembled magazine covers. However, the reality festered like a sore behind those shiny grins. My siblings were famous. The golden lad was my older brother Nathan, the family's pride. The football captain of straight A Ivy, my younger sister, was the little princess who always had her way, was praised and wore brand new gowns as well as myself. The assistant was me, the person who did the errands, pressed the uniforms, cleaned the plates, and set the table. I was expected, not requested. My mother would remark, "Be useful, Rhea," with her sly little smirk whenever I grumbled. "Do you have anything else going for you?" Additionally, my dad would pretend he didn't hear me if I turned to him for assistance while he glanced at his newspaper shift in his chair. They were experts at silence. I recall making my mother a homemade birthday card once. I was around 7 years old. I colored it for hours. Inside, a poem is being written. Cut out little paper hearts to adhere to the edge, as if it were a receipt. She opened it, glanced at it for a split second, and then put it away. "No," grin. "Thank you, but no." That following evening, my mom sobbed as if she had just been given a diamond from heaven when Ivy handed her a cheap necklace that she had chosen with Dad's assistance. But I never gave up trying. In the hopes that someone might notice, I put in more effort at school. In the hopes that independence would respect me. I took a part-time job at the age of 16 to pay for my own clothes. I was rendered invisible in new ways, though. "Why don't you resemble Nathan more?" she would inquire. "Why can't you have Ivy's grace?" Favoritism wasn't the only factor. Until I stopped requesting affection and began judging my value based on how much I could bear it, was a gradual, steady chipping away. I wasn't surprised, therefore, when she indicated that chair beside the garbage can. It simply validated my long-held suspicions. The table has never actually included me. When I turned 18, I relocated. At the door, there were no tears or a dramatic farewell. A duffel bag me and a silent departure. Nobody made an effort to halt. My mom didn't inquire about my destination. Neither money nor even counsel was offered by my father. Ivy and Nathan were unaware. They probably didn't even glance up from their phones. I was not fleeing. I was releasing myself, even though it meant venturing directly into the unknown. The initial years were harsh. During the day, I worked at a petrol station, studies during the day, and waited tables at night. I went weeks without eating anything but coffee and quick noodles. I lived in a one-room apartment with no heating and crumbling paint. Winter was like a punishment, but I persisted because my tenacity made up for the lack of support I had. I applied to college, even though I wasn't sure I could afford it. I applied for every scholarship, took out student loans, studied late into the night, slept for 3 hours, and then went to work. I never allowed myself to get behind. Even though I missed birthdays, holidays, and celebrations, I aced every lesson and passed every test. It seemed like a covert triumph. Throughout it all, I felt as though I was silently, imperceptibly, and motionlessly creating something for myself. On birthdays, I continued to phone home. On holidays, I mailed gifts and cards. Little ones, but considerate. When no one answered on Mother's Day, I left voicemails. After receiving my associate's degree and subsequently my bachelor's, I sent updates. No responses, no. Well done, nothing but quiet. However, I persisted because deep down, I still had the need for my mother's acceptance. I still had hope that one day they would see more in me than just the ghost. The errand girl, the assistants, and the family pictures. I didn't require their support for my battle. All I wanted was for them to see it to express our pride in you, Ria. However, that day never materialized. I thus learned how to silently cheer for myself in my personal area. I said, "You did it," as I framed my diploma and hung it on a wall in my small apartment. They forgot me, but I never forgot them, so I returned to work. That's the problem with love. Just because it isn't returned doesn't mean it always fades. However, things do begin to shift. I pretended I didn't feel like trash myself as I sat there in that shaky fold-out chair by the trash can. The cost of the restaurant was high: white linen napkins, crystal glasses, and silverware. That didn't go with my attire or my budget. I had selected a dress that was elegant but not designer. Nevertheless, my sister Ivy gave me a quick look as soon as I entered and asked, "Did you get that from a thrift store clearance rack?" The others laughed. Not even my mother stood up for me. "Well, at least you made the effort," she said, taking a sip of her wine. I refrained from speaking. Small presents and mementos from my business trip to Chicago, where I had closed my first significant deal, were what I had brought them. Personalized keychains for Nathan and Ivy, a small leather wallet for Dad, and a perfume for Mom. Thoughtful but not costly. Individual. They hardly looked at them when I distributed them. Nathan said, "Do I look like I need a keychain?" as he held us up before throwing it like a discarded napkin back on the table. Not even Ivy opened hers. When my father went to the bathroom, he left the wallet in the booth, trying too hard as usual. My mother muttered and rolled her eyes. I smiled nonetheless. I attempted to participate in their discussions. They responded to questions about my parents' vacation, Nathan's new condo, and Ivy's wedding plans. Yes, but like they were talking to a stranger, a distant relative. They barely remembered. No follow-up questions, no warmth. Then Ivy asked what I was doing these days. I perked up, heart hopeful. "I've been working in real estate," I said. "Actually, I just launched a small property firm. That's nice." Mom cut in, "But it must be exhausting doing it all on your own." "Some people are just built to settle for less," the table laughed. I nodded, pretending it didn't sting, pretending I hadn't built something from absolute nothing, pretending I wasn't wearing shoes. I bought with my own money. After pulling 14-hour days to keep my clients happy, pretending their laughter didn't sound exactly like it had when I was 13, and spilled juice on Ivy's dress, and they all called me clumsy. Useless. Embarrassing. I just sipped my water and looked down at my napkin, trying to blink away the sting behind my eyes. They didn't see me. Not really. And I was starting to realize they never had the laughter simmered as dessert was cleared. Empty wine bottles stood like trophies across the table, testaments to their indulgence. The waiter returned with a polished smile and handed over the bill, presented in a sleek black leather folder. My mother didn't even hesitate. "She's paying," she said, her voice light but sharp, her manicured nail pointing directly at me. "Didn't you say you've got money now?" The words felt like a slap, sugar-coated but still bruising. The entire table turned to look at me. I blinked, and sure if I heard her right. What Nathan chuckled, stretching back in his chair. "Come on, big shot. Real estate mogul, right?" I glanced at the bill, and my heart jumped. $4,600. They had ordered steaks, seafood towers, endless bottles of wine, custom desserts. The works. I hadn't touched half the items on the table. I had been too busy trying to keep up with the conversation, too busy swallowing pride. I looked at my father. He didn't meet my eyes. He just adjusted his glasses as if this wasn't his problem. Ivy was texting under the table. My mother sipped what had to be her fourth glass of wine and offered me a smile that wasn't really a smile. "What's wrong?" she inquired. "You said you were doing fine." Yes, I had said that because I was doing fine, but not $600 on people who don't respect me. Fine. Still, I felt the familiar tug on my chest, the compulsion to be enough to prove something, to finally be considered worthy. I've been chasing that since I was old enough to notice the difference in tone when they talked to me versus my siblings. I took a breath, then another, and then I looked at the waiter and smiled. "That's not my table." The waiter blinked. Apologies. I leaned forward just slightly, my voice calm, almost gentle. This is my table, I repeated. I'm not with them. The table fell silent. My mother's jaw tightened. What are you talking about? I wasn't invited, I said, pushing my chair back. I wasn't welcomed. I was embarrassed, degraded, ignored. So no, I won't pay for this dinner because it's not mine. None of this is mine. I stood smoothing down my dress. Nathan scoffed. Wow! Dramatic match. I didn't even look at him. The waiter glanced from me to the others, confused. They'll share it? I said gently. I'm sure they can afford it. After all, they're family. Then I turned and went away, heels clicking against the marble floor, my heart racing. Not with embarrassment this time, but with something I hadn't felt around them in a long time. Freedom. For once, I hadn't asked to be accepted. I hadn't performed the part, I had simply gone away, and it strangely seemed wealthier than any bank account amount I'd ever earned. I remained there for a time, letting the quiet fall like a thundercloud over the linen-wrapped table. Their lips were slightly open. Their faces were airy and frozen like forks. They had used steak knives so liberally that they could cut through the tension. I said in a calm, even quiet voice. I'm not family. It's not my table, remember? Nobody made a move. I looked aside and nodded courteously to the waiter. With conviction, my heels clicked. I didn't flinch this time. I didn't turn around. I heard a shuffle behind me. My mom said something to herself. My sister let out a gasp. My sibling swore. However, I had already moved beyond the wine display, the chandeliers, and the girl who had always been excluded. No more. The server carrying a different bill rushed up next to me as I arrived at the hostess stand. I accepted it with a smile. I appreciate you breaking it apart in advance, I said, as I took my card out of a stylish handbag. I knew what was going to happen tonight. He gave an almost too nice nod. You're not worthy of it. I gave a shrug. For years, they had been practicing that behavior. I give him such a hefty gratuity that his eyes bulge. Divide the remainder equally. I gestured to the mess I had left behind. After all, they are family. I felt the cool air on my skin as soon as I went outside. After years beneath water, it was like taking a deep breath for the first time. I refrained from crying. I didn't think twice about going inside. I could picture the chaos. The disputes, the bewildered requests for the waiter, and the way my mother would later fabricate the story to paint herself as the victim. However, I was no longer concerned about it. Not my table, not my debt, not my laughing, not my seat. For the first time in years, I felt completely in control of the tale they previously wrote me out of as I went to my car and opened the door. Oh, and I hadn't finished yet. My phone rang exactly 1 week later. I gazed at the display. June, my sibling. I let it to ring. But then again, it was my mother this time, followed by my sister. Dad wouldn't call me for more than a year after that. Even so, it was only to inquire about the possibility of picking up dry washing while I was nearby. I didn't respond. Not when I was involved in something far more significant. There was a hushed excitement in the glass conference room, pens in hand. My legal team sat across from a room full of executives in suits. I was looking at the acquisition's final document, moments away from finalizing a 7-figure contract. I turned the pages with composure and concentration. A national brand was interested in purchasing my modest but powerful startup, which I created from the ground up in between night work and school debt payments. I had launched my platform. I saw myself completely, but investors saw the possibility. My phone buzzed once more at last. A message appeared this time. Our cards weren't sufficiently charged. We ate and bolted after the restaurant filed a report. Could you give me a call back? Arjun, I didn't. They assumed that since I always did, I would pick up, because at every gathering I calmly accepted the guilt they offered me, cleaned up their mess and bailed them out. However, Ria was no longer there. Actually, I had expected this. The moment I left the supper, I left them with the burden of their own entitlement in addition to the cost. They believed that by giving me the fold-out chair, they were punishing me. They handed me the microphone without realizing it. There was another message. Mom believes you should apologize to us. We were publicly humiliated by you. That's what a daughter does. I almost burst out laughing. I'm sorry. What type of mother places her child close to trash and makes fun of her? What sort of family makes fun of one of its members just because she wore a discount dress rather than a couture one? My pen landed on the last page. I put my signature there. I grinned. My actual life had only barely begun. That evening, I checked my email. Numerous calls were unanswered. Additional messages. Even one read, "Maybe another time. We were planning to invite you to Mom's anniversary dinner. Be less sensitive." Feeling sensitive. They always called me that when I sobbed after being left out. I stepped out of the room to collect myself. It hurt when I dared to say that. However, I had lost my sensitivity. They were just noisy, and I was successful. I poured myself a glass of wine and shut down my laptop. I lifted my glass to the quiet surrounding me as lights outside the city glistened against the skyline. It didn't feel lonely for the first time. It was earned. Now they needed me. Finally. Though I was too busy needing me. On the rooftop, the wind was ideal. It was crisp enough to remind me that autumn had arrived, but not too cold. A live trio in the corner hummed jazz while golden string lights danced overhead. Behind us, the skyline loomed boldly and magnificently. The view wasn't the best, though. The table was the object. 20 chairs at a long, exquisite table with gold accent plates, fresh flowers, and white linen. They were all full with people who had noticed me, appreciated me, and picked me. When I spoke, nobody smirked. Since I belonged here, no one made fun of my attire or questioned why I felt I should be seated. My co-founder Ava was seated across from me. Grinning, she lifted her glass. Laughter echoed around the table for the lady who closed a door in a transaction in the same week, Mr. Kaplan. My mentor gave me a little elbow bump. "Child, you've always had it. All that was required was to cease awaiting authorization." I silently nodded, taking in the warmth, the tranquility, and the lack of criticism. This was not a noisy or excessive meal. It was not necessary. I owned it. Each visitor was someone who had accompanied me on the ascent. My roommate, who was also my investor, became my sister. The barista I recruited to run our new office was the same person who gave me free coffee when I was learning to code. Retaliation wasn't the point here. It has to do with recognition. I had been sitting next to rubbish both physically and emotionally, and begging for crumbs at a table for years. I made my own table now, and I couldn't find a fold-out chair anywhere. Ava leaned in halfway through dinner. "Has your family given you another call?" I grinned. "They did. Wanted to have a conversation. Therefore, my actions injure them." "What were you saying?" "No," I said, raising my glass, "because you have no idea how to explain yourself to those who only adore you when you keep quiet." Everybody gave a nod. They succeeded because they understood what it meant to be superior without ever lowering yourself to justify your value. Handmade truffles and little pieces of cardamom cake were served as dessert. I got up and gave my glass a tap. "Thank you for seeing me before the rest of the world did," I remarked in a quiet but firm voice. "For sitting at this table and applauding when I won. You wanted to do it not because you had to." Glasses were hoisted in a chorus of cheers. I glanced at the city lights before turning back to face my true family. I did more than just throw a meal that evening. I took back all the versions of myself that had ever felt inadequate. I revised the guidelines. I was seated at the head of a table that held not just food but also healing history and a fresh start. And with the stars overhead and the laughing all around me, I was certain of one thing at that very moment. The issue was never me. Their table was too small for me.